Hi everyone, today's video we're going to talk about a security enhancement you can put into your Windows Enterprise estates, and it's called Local Administrator Password Solution, or LAPS for short. As you can tell from the name, this is aimed at securing the local admin passwords on your Windows endpoints so that they're not all the same and they can't be easily guessed or exploited by an attacker. Now this video is aimed obviously at enterprise clients and systems admins and people like that, so I would put this down as an intermediate on the difficulty level. So before we get started, just a little bit of background to LAPS. Now, as you probably know, every Windows system has a local administrator account. So not a domain account, a local administrator account on that machine. Now, we've moved on from the days where every user was a local admin on their machines, or at least we should have, and it's pretty standard practice these days in the enterprise for administrators to have a non-admin account for doing their day-to-day work and an admin account that they use when they need to elevate themselves. This separation of duty is pretty much standard practice. But that single local admin account remains. And in a lot of cases, this local admin account often would have a single password, which meant if that password was exposed to an attacker, every machine in your domain would be at risk. Now, for a long time, enterprises addressed this by disabling that local admin account, whether in the image or through group policy, and then they allowed groups of AD-based users to be local admins, i.e. members of the local admins group, on those machines. And this raises a couple of tricky points though. Firstly, if you're relying solely on Active Directory users to be able to administer your machines, if a machine can't contact Active Directory, then you're pretty snookered when it comes to fixing the machine. You simply won't be able to log on. And also, if you make lots and lots of users administrators on lots of your devices, then if one of those AD-based admin accounts is compromised, then the attacker potentially has access to all those other machines and can swiftly escalate their intrusion through your estate. Another common way of dealing with this was that enterprises made that local administrator account password unique so that you could re-enable that account rather than having big groups of AD-based users as admins, but not take the risk of an attacker who might know the password being able to log on to every single machine. However, humans being humans, it was often standard practice to use something memorable or that could be guessed from a known value as the password. So the MAC address, the serial number, the computer name, any of the above really, with some added constants. Now this offers slightly more in the way of security, but any attacker gaining insight into the variables that make up that local admin password would again have free rein across the environment. So it's been clear for a long time that a more secure answer to this question is required, and this is where an application called LAPS, Local Administrator Password Solution, comes into its own. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to show you how to deploy LAPS into your environment. Now, the LAPS installer can be downloaded from the link that I'm showing you right here, which is also linked in the description. And it's a single installer, whether for x64 or x86. But when you install it, it has four components to it. There's the LAPS PowerShell extension, the LAPS user interface, the LAPS group policy client-side extension, and the LAPS GPO editor templates. Now, the way I would normally deploy it in an environment is shown in this diagram here, which I'm now showing on the screen. So you can see that the PowerShell extension is installed on a DC. The management user interface and the GPO editor template are on my management desktop, and the GPO CSE gets installed to all of the devices that you want to manage in this way. However, for the purposes of this video, I'm actually going to install the PowerShell extension and the management UI and the GPO templates all onto my domain controller, because that's what I'm using as a management desktop. But separate those out as required for your environment. The PowerShell extension needs to go where you're going to run the upgrades to the AD schema from, and the GPO CSE needs to be on all of your managed devices. The other bits you can install as you need to. So let's get started showing you how to install LAPS. As I said, it's available free from Microsoft. There's no cost associated with it. All you need to get it up and running on your Windows endpoints is basically a functional Active Directory. So let's get going. Okay, if I just browse across to wherever I've saved my LAPS software to, once you've downloaded it, you'll see there's a number of installers in there for different processor architectures. Obviously we're on x64, so we'll run this one. Now, select which parts you need to install. As I said, on my domain controller, which this is, I'm going to install 3 of the components. I'm going to install the user interface, I'm going to install the PowerShell module, and I'm going to install the GPO editing templates as well. As I said, you can spread those out around different areas if you need to in your environment. But just click on install, respond to the elevation prompt, and you're done. That's it. It's installed on my domain controller now, and I'll show you how to prepare those bits in just a moment. But obviously you also need to install it to all of your managed endpoints, right? So obviously, for purposes of this video, I'm just showing you installing it onto one managed endpoint. However, if you've got hundreds, if you've got thousands of them, you'll need to deploy it out using something like SCCM, something like that. There's many ways you could deploy it out there onto your machines. It supports all the usual MSI switches, so you should be able to get that done, no problem. But just for the purpose of this video, I'm going to install it on my target endpoint by hand. Now what you need to install on the managed devices is you don't need any of that stuff. You don't need the user interface, the PowerShell, GPO templates. You just need the top one, the ADM PWD GPO extension, which enables Laps to work on this machine. So just let that run through. That's done there now. It's now installed on our managed endpoint as well. So that's it. That's the installation phase. We can now move on to preparing it. Right, let's get the prep done so that we can get the Laps solution working. First thing we need to do is a little bit of AD work. So I'll just switch across to my domain controller here. First thing you need to do is identify the OUs and the groups that you want to use. So you need to find out the distinguished name of the organisational unit, and for this you need to turn on advanced features in ADUC, like I've just done there. You need to find the distinguished name of the organisational unit that you want to manage through Laps. Now you may have lots of these, but I've just got one, so if I drill down through my workstations OU, it's this one here, the workers OU, that I want to manage through Laps. So if you right click on that and choose properties, and go to attribute editor and find the distinguished name attribute, which is here, and literally just copy that out of there, and I'll pop it in a notepad window so I can reference that later. What you also need as well is you need an Active Directory group of users who can then manage that particular OU in Laps, who can read the password and set the password. So if I look in my groups, security groups here, I've got a group I've already created called Laps users, put one of my test users in there. Those are the users in that group who are going to be able to manage the passwords on that OU. Now, you may have many different, I'll just make a note of the group name there. You may have many different OUs you want to manage, and obviously once you manage an OU, it manages all the machine accounts under that OU, even in sub-OUs. And you may want specific groups of machines to be Laps managed by specific groups of users. So map all of them out at this point and make a note of them. Right, next thing you need to check is we need to make an extension to the Active Directory schema for this to work. Now, if you're in a production environment, make sure you do this through proper testing and change control. I'm not going to be held responsible for you breaking a production Active Directory in this way. Even if you're in a lab environment, take a snapshot. So you need to run an administrative Windows PowerShell instance, and what you also need to do is quickly check in ADUC that the user you're running this PowerShell as is a member of the Schema Admins group. Check my Schema Admins group, see my admin account's already in there, so I'm good, but if you're not, make sure you add yourself in and then log out and log back in. Now, first thing you need to do is you need to import the required module to make the schema extension. So if you can spell, if you type import-module adm pwd.ps, you should get a response there without any errors. Next, you need to run update-adm pwd ad schema. Run that, and this will update your Active Directory schema with the new attributes. If it's successful, you will see a status of success in there. So that's the first part done. You've extended the Active Directory schema. Next, what we need to do is we need to make sure that no users have what are called extended rights on any of the OUs that we're trying to manage. So you can identify this by typing in a command and putting in the names of the OUs that you're targeting, which is why I got myself to save the distinguished name of the OU earlier into here, which makes it handy. So I'm just going to copy that out for posterity now. So the command you need to type here is find-adm pwd extended rights. I think that's it, minus identity, and in there, inside quotes, paste that distinguished name there, and if you pipe this to a command of format table as well, run that command. Now what you'll see here is, what you should see here is, if everything's okay, is that it says groups like domain admins have authority. That's okay, domain admins being able to read extended rights. However, if there are any other users or groups listed there, what you will need to do is run a console called adsedit, adsedit with one E, adsedit.msc. Expand that up, right click here, choose connect to, click OK, and if you scroll down till you find the organisational unit that you're working with, so ours was in devices, workstations, Citrix, and it was called workers, right click on this and choose properties, and what we are looking at is the security tab. If there are any other users or groups appearing in that PowerShell apart from domain admins or other admin groups that you may have added in there, find them in here, look in advanced. So if for instance it showed, I don't know, the print operators group, click on that one, click on edit, and what you would need to remove is this one here, this all extended rights. Make sure that is unchecked and propagated properly, but you'll only need to do that if something shows up in there that you weren't expecting, right? So then you can close the ADS editor down and you're done with that. But as I said, only if something shows from that PowerShell output that doesn't look right. Next, we need to run another bit of PowerShell, and this command is required so that the machines can actually update their own passwords and the timestamps of those password changes in AD. So what you need to do is run this command. So it's set-adm pwd computer self permission, if I remember rightly. Then you have a flag -org unit, and then open your quotes, paste in not that, which is something I was quickly doing in the meantime. Switch back here and copy that again, pop that in there, and once that is done, simply press enter and it should come up with a status of delegated, which means it's successful, right? Finally, the final bit of PowerShell that we need to do, another couple of commands. We need to run the commands that delegate the authority to read or reset password. You can mix these up if you want, but we're going to do them both for the same group. So set adm pwd read password permission is the first one, -org unit, and paste that in there. But also on the end here, put a flag called allowed principals, like that, and in here pop in the name of the group that we also specified earlier. So this is telling you to set read permission on that organisational unit and apply it to that group. Again, you should say delegated if it's successful. And finally, the next one is reset password permission. Instead of typing all that in again, I'll just edit the command here and just literally change read to reset. So to give reset password permission to the machines in that organisational unit, to that group, simply press return there. You will be able to tell, you know, obviously, if you want to mix up, if you want to have different groups that could read and different groups that could read and reset, you can mix that bit up there. But just for posterity, we've applied the read and the reset permission to one group on one OU. So that's all of the Active Directory side work done. We should be now ready to move on to configure the group policies that drive this. The next bit that we need to do, we need to simply set up some group policy objects which will deliver the lapse configuration settings down to the machines that we want to manage. Now a quick word before you get started. When you install the GPO admin templates, it pops these in the local C:\\Windows/policy definitions folder on that machine, which should work for most people, but if like me you're using a group policy central store, don't forget to copy the ADMX and the ADML files across to your group policy central store as well. Once you've done that, if you go into Group Policy Management Console and drill down to the OU that you want to set up for lapse management, which in my case is the workers one, create a GPO on the domain and link it here. Call it whatever it needs to be called, and then if you edit this group policy object, you should see in there that now you have policies, admin templates, and you have a folder called lapse, which has 4 settings in there. That's all there is, 4 settings that drive the lapse configuration. Now, the number one that you need to turn on is this one, enable local admin password management. This actually turns LAPS on, right? So make sure that's actually turned on or LAPS isn't going to work at all. You then have an option called password settings, which is a very handy one. It lets you set the complexity, the length and the maximum age of the password. Now in my environment, I like to knock this up to 15. You can do it whatever you want. And I like to set the maximum password age to 1. Therefore, if a password is compromised for whatever reason, its maximum lifespan on each machine is only 24 hours at the most. And that's the way I like to configure that. Now, if you're in an environment where you've changed the name of the administrator account, for instance, you might have disabled the built-in one or renamed it or both, then you need to put in here what's the actual name of the administrator account name. On mine, I've changed it to admin, rather bizarrely, not really a very clever one, but there you go. Only do that when you've actually renamed it. So that's the one of these settings you may not need to set up. And finally, this one, do not allow password expiration time longer than required by policy. When a user goes into LAPS and checks out a password, they can pick a length of time for that password to be reset once they've finished it. And they can set it to a very long time. They can set it to a week, to 2 weeks. If you configure this to enable the policy that you set for the maximum password length, don't forget I've got that set to 1 day, a user would never be able to configure more than 1 day's worth of checking out of an admin password. So I always find it's very handy to turn that one on as well. So now when a user logs into LAPS, if they can say the password, they can, but then they can only use it for a maximum of 24 hours before that password's reset, and they have to go back into LAPS and check it out again. So that's how you set all of the group policy objects for that. Now, if I quickly jump across to my managed machine here and I quickly run a GP update, what should happen is those policies should then be brought down to this machine and they will then be active, and we'll be able to see that the machine is actually being managed via LAPS. So let that complete, and we'll pick that up again in a second. Now, that group policy update is completed, so those policies should be down on all of our target devices, or one of them. We're now going to switch back to our domain controller, if you remember, where we installed the LAPS user interface. We're going to see if the users can see the passwords in there. Now, first of all, I'm actually going to run the LAPS user interface as a different user. I'm going to run it as a user that doesn't have access, right? So, when I run the LAPS user interface here, the target machine we had is called DT004. What we can do is we can see when the password expires, right? We can read that attribute. We can't see the password itself. So that user doesn't have any access to the local admin passwords. They can't check it out, they can't reset it. Now if I then go and run the LAPS UI as the user who was actually in the group that we gave access to via that PowerShell. So if we run it as this user, and if this time we type in DT004, you should say this time there is a password there that the user can check out, they can take, and then they can choose to set the password, as I said, a maximum of 24 hours in the future, so that's the standard one. So the user can then take that password and use it for 24 hours to get local admin access to that machine. Now the idea is that you would stop adding great big groups of users into the local administrators group. Users would still have an AD admin account that they used for things like Active Directory work and things like that, but with respect to actually going on to an end user workstation, they would simply check out that local admin password, which is then valid for 24 hours to get their work done. So one final bit I should mention, we've got LAPS UI set up and running, but in a secure environment, it's always useful to have it checked. When a user checks a password out, is to audit that and then save that using some sort of SIEM tool so that we can understand what's going on in case there actually is a breach. So the final thing that I'd recommend doing is run another bit of PowerShell. This is set ADM PWD auditing. If I could spell auditing as well, would be handy. Set ADM PWD auditing minus org unit as the parameter again. Again, copy the OU that you want to do the auditing on. So pop that in there, in between the quotes like so. And also add another parameter there, audited principals, and this tells it which group you're going to audit as well. So if I put in LAPS space users, which I know is the name of that group, Press return there. You can see it now says delegated. What will happen now, every time a user checks the password out, it will write an event to the security log with a 4662 event ID showing that the password was checked out, and you can now track that. So if you do have a breach and you need to track back, that's where you would go to do it. So there you go, that's just over 20 minutes, I think, probably under 20 minutes if you take out my bit of introduction at the beginning, to get Laps set up and running in your environment. And that's a very good thing you can do to improve your security posture right across the board and improve your pen testing results. Thanks very much for watching. Also, thanks to Rory Monaghan and everybody who subscribed from the EUC community to get me over 1,000 subscribers, which is a great achievement. So thank you very much to all of those people. And hopefully, now that I have got over 1,000 subscribers, I'll be able to do much more content and hopefully many more things that you're interested in. Thank you very much.